Hello everyone, welcome to my session, an introduction to digital accessibility, and it's really lovely to see you all here today. My name is Roberta Beattie. I'm a white female with blonde hair, and I'm the Digital Accessibility Tech Champion for the Digital Culture Network. And I've got around 25 years experience in digital marketing and accessibility. On the agenda for today, I'll be giving you a broad introduction to digital accessibility, including some simple things that you can do to get started right away with your existing content. I'll show you some useful tools and resources, and we'll finish up the session with some time to ask some questions. So don't forget to add them to the Q&A. So let's get started. Just relax and enjoy the session. People are limited by barriers in society, not by their physical abilities or differences. I love this quote from Shape Arts, because the goal of digital accessibility is about removing the barriers that prevent anybody from being able to understand or interact with your digital content. And when you publish content without considering accessibility, you're going to be creating barriers for your visitors to overcome in order to access it. I'm going to start with a little poll. This figure on the screen that you sent, that you can see right now, is from the 2021 census, and I just wanted to get you to have a guess about how many people in England identified themselves as disabled within that census. So close to 60 million people in the UK. We're getting some really good results. I'll just give it a few more minutes, a few more seconds. Give your guesses. Okay, I'm going to share the results now. So a lot of you have thought 5.2 million. Second runner-up was 10.4 million. Good guess, everyone. And then 2.3 million. The answer is, in fact, 10.4 million in the 2021 census identified themselves as disabled. That's about 1 in 4 people, or 17.8% of the population. And it's a huge amount of the public that could be denied access to your work if you're using public money to fund your creative and cultural work. And if you're using public money, you have a responsibility to make it accessible. Let's break this down a bit. Typically, out of 100 people, 6 of them might have difficulty hearing. 11 of them might have difficulty reading or even seeing to varying degrees. 4 of them might have difficulty using a mouse. And 13 of them are likely to be older, and they could potentially be experiencing a mixture of accessibility barriers. 5 of them might be colorblind. And 13 of them might be neurodivergent. And essentially, everyone at one time or another in their lifetime is going to experience accessibility barriers, whether they are permanent or temporary. Essentially, accessibility should always be the first thing you think about when you're creating your digital content. It's a crucial part of knowing who your audiences are and what they need. And it's all too often an afterthought and the last thing checked for. Whereas, in fact, the earlier you start checking for it and thinking about it, the easier it is for you, because you don't have to go back and rework everything to take it into considerations. And there are some simple, broad rules that you can think about right from the start. Now, when it comes to forms of digital content, there's lots to think about. This can include things like your website, both how it looks on a computer and a mobile phone, your video content, your social media posts, your newsletter content, your online training or webinars, your digital downloads and resources, your online ticket booking system, right through to the way your online form works and how they communicate to visitors, whether they've got it right or wrong. If you're creating content that's accessible, you're creating content that works for everyone. The World Wide Web Consortium, otherwise known as the W3C, have created a set of guidelines called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines that cover the broad standard technical requirements, and they're a great place to start. But digital accessibility isn't just about these WCAG standards. And the automated checks and the tools that you can use to help you spot these technical accessibility blockers, they're really useful, but they should only be part of the process. Accessibility is really about people and about thinking what needs to be in place to allow them to access your content effectively. And it ties in so closely to the objectives you've got for that content and knowing what actions you want people to take when they access it. Ultimately, you'll be creating great user experiences with universal design principles that work for everyone. And at the end of the day, it's going to make your digital content a lot more successful. We just covered what digital accessibility is and how it relates to your audiences and the various types of digital content you might want to consider. Now we're going to take a look at accessibility principles. Those web content guideline accessibility principles that I just talked about, they're often referred to as PAW, and they form the basis of those guidelines. And these principles can be applied to all of your digital content. They are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Perceivable. This means that users must be able to access the information being presented. It can't be invisible to any of their senses. An example of this is to provide text alternatives for any non-text content, such as images, so that they can be understood by screen readers. Operable. This means that users must be able to use, navigate, and interact with your content. For example, making sure that the content is keyboard accessible so that people can access it without having to use a mouse. Understandable. This means that you should make sure that people can understand information and take the actions that you want them to take. So think things like user journeys and simple language and clear signposting and so on. And then finally, robust. And this means as technologies advance and evolve, the content you create is as future-proofed as possible by following these best practices and covering these overarching principles. And also, it'll give it the best chance it can to operate well on a variety of devices. Another really simple way to break down digital accessibility is to break it down into modes and barriers. There are 3 modes of accessibility. There's permanent. These are accessibility considerations that don't go away or get better eventually. Examples of this can include profound blindness or permanent hearing loss. And then there's temporary. These are accessibility considerations that last for a finite period of time or a limited period of time. Examples of this can include a broken arm or tiredness. And then there's situational accessibility considerations. And these are due to the situations that you might find yourself in. So examples of this can include slow internet, screen glare, or noisy room, that type of thing. And essentially, the access needs of your visitors are not always straightforward, and they might involve a combination of different potential barriers. And the things you need to think about when you're creating your content revolve around these accessibility barriers that could potentially happen. And they are cognitive, anything related to the brain and processing of information; visual, anything relating to sight; auditory, anything related to hearing; motor, anything relating to movement or the physical body; and speech, anything relating to the function of speaking. Those accessibility principles form the landscape. We discussed poor, the accessibility modes and barrier categories. Just going to take a sip of water. And keeping those in mind, I'm going to move on now to discuss some simple things that you can do to improve the accessibility of your digital content. Let's start with some website accessibility tips. Navigating with a keyboard is an easy thing to check on your website or digital content, just to see how it behaves when you use one. All you have to do is press the tab key and see if it skips through the links in the site in a logical order. You should be able to tell it's working visually by something called a focus. Basically, when you've tabbed to a link on your site, it should have a visual change to show you that that link's active. So in the example on my screen, you can see a box around the text. The link is when the link's in a focus state. And this means if you hit return or space on your keyboard, you'll go exactly to where that link leads you. One thing to look out for here is if your navigation has drop downs, make sure you can tab through them and not get stuck inside that drop down. This is a really common problem that I see quite a lot of. The first thing the tab key will activate should be a skip to content link. And this is a great way to allow people to get to the good stuff on your web page quickly. It just basically skips through the navigation and goes straight to the main content. On the Digital Culture Network site, you can see it in action. The skip to content link should only appear when you hit the tab key for the first time. And I've just got another example here of an active state on the Digital Culture Network site again. You can see that there's a little box around the link indicating that it's active. Another thing that's helpful for navigation and orientation are page titles. Page titles are instructions inside the code of your page. These don't usually show up in the actual content of the page. They usually appear at the top in the browser tabs. There are lots of great reasons why you should write meaningful page titles. And one of the main ones is that basically screen readers and people using screen readers will know which tab your content is in if they've got lots of tabs open. So writing descriptive page titles is really useful for that. They're also going to help you come up in relevant searches on Google, because this is one of the things it looks at to understand what your content is about. If you look at the example I've got on the page here, everything that you've written or crafted for your page titles appears as a blue link in the Google search results. So not only are you going to be doing something that really helps accessibility, you're also going to be helping yourself come up in relevant searches. Another thing to think about within the structure of content on a website is the headings and how you organize your content. Consistent and logical content order is important because it makes the information you're delivering easier to understand. And they're also another thing that screen readers can use to flick through the content and navigate the page. You only need one H1 tag per page, so that's your main heading title. And the rest of the sections will either fall into H2, H3, H4, and so on. And it's important to use them in the correct order to allow people to understand the flow and importance of the content, because this means they can easily tell which bit of text relates to which heading. Another really simple thing you can think about is fonts. Using simple sans serif fonts makes it easier to read, understand, and process information. Sans serif fonts are usually much simpler design-wise, with less details and ticks, and they're just less complicated to read than the fancy serif fonts. You can also start to think about if there's a simpler way of saying things within your content. In the example shown here, I've replaced "in the event of" with the word "if," shortening 4 words down into 1. And another content tip is you can break down large blocks of text into smaller paragraphs because this makes information easier to read and understand. You also need to be careful about using specialist terms, acronyms, or abbreviations, and be careful to explain what they are so that because not everyone's going to be familiar with them. And if you've got complicated themes or topics to discuss, you might want to think about creating easy read formats. Easy read refers to the presentation of text in an accessible and easy to understand format. It's often useful for people with learning disabilities, and it might also work well for people with other conditions affecting how they process information. One of the easiest things to check for is color contrast as well, because poor color contrast ratios create visual barriers. In the image on the screen now, you can see that the black on yellow works really well, as does the white on dark blue. But the dark blue on dark green is low contrast, and the green makes the text vibrate. And another thing you have to think about with text and color and contrast is when you put text on top of images or moving video, because this can cause problems too. So if you're using text above images for backgrounds or videos or moving banners, make sure the text has enough color contrast to stand out nicely. And if you're unsure, you can use tools like WebAIM and Color Contrast Analyzer, and these can help you identify contrast issues. Moving on to links, using descriptive language for links is really important. As we've seen earlier, keyboards and screen readers tabbing through the links on the site won't necessarily have any other information surrounding the context of a link. So if it simply reads click here, it's not going to be easy to identify where that link's going to take you. So by using descriptive wording, this is going to help people feel confident they're accessing the right information. In the example shown here, the read more link is out of context, could take you anywhere, whereas download our annual report PDF is much clearer. You know that it's a download, you know that it's a PDF, and you also know what the PDF is about. If you're using sliders or moving banners or animation, make sure people can stop or slow them down if they want to, because this can be really distracting and confusing for some people. And I just want to talk about images and alt tags as well. Alt tags are descriptions of the images on your web page, and they allow screen readers to describe what that image is to the user. A top tip here is to use factual short descriptions, generally no more than 125 characters, if possible, and describe that image accurately or the emotion behind using that image in the first place. Another thing to note about images and alt text is if the image is a design element, you can add an alt tag with no description. And this is because screen readers can easily skip over it. If an image doesn't have a blank alt tag, a screen reader will tend to read out the file name of the image, which can be really frustrating and annoying. Notifications and form error feedback. It's a bit of a mouthful, but what I mean here is for any forms you put on your site, think about what happens if someone doesn't fill it in right, and the language or prompts you use to tell people to change it. We've probably all suffered filling in a bad form at one point or another. If you put your messages under the fields you want people to fill in and give them a good instruction or indication of what's wrong with it, for example, we need your name here, or please input your name above, it's a lot easier for them to see what their mistake was and make it right. And it's much better than putting it in a long list at the top. Also, sending people to a thank you page after the form gets submitted is a really good signal to tell people that the information they submitted went through okay. I've seen forms that end up on a blank page, or the form clears its data, and you're just left feeling really confused whether it was successful or not. Whilst I'm on the subject of forms, I thought I'd mention CAPTCHA. CAPTCHA is something that's used on website forms to prevent spam and bots submitting bad information. Unfortunately, the problem with these security measures is that CAPTCHA generally aren't considered to be accessible, and there really isn't a perfect solution. So you might want to leave out CAPTCHA on your web forms, but if you are having a problem with spam, the Google service is probably the most accessible one because it has a couple of alternatives. It's got the visual, it's got the text, and there's also one that you can use that you can just click "I'm not a robot," and sometimes there's I think there's one also that auto detects as well. And if you're using pop-ups on your website, they can be distracting and frustrating, especially if you can't navigate away from them or close them with a keyboard. So be mindful of when you're using them and make sure you test to make sure they don't prevent people from using your site when they pop up. And I wanted to talk about the information, the actual information about accessibility you put on your site as well. It's a great idea to include an accessibility statement. But also when you're going to a venue to see a show, it can be daunting for some people because they're not sure what's going to happen when they get there. And it's a brilliant idea to take the stress away by including some information about what to expect when you get there. And even sometimes you can do little bits on characters in the show or what the exhibition is about and that type of thing. A really good example is the Delaware Pavilion. They've got this amazing video that shows you exactly how the venue's set up and includes everything from the gift shop and the toilets to what the view looks like from the seat that you can sit in. And it's really, really good. And it's worth a look. I'll make sure that Dean shares the link with you and it gets sent out afterwards so you can have a look. It's quite long, so I'm not going to play it today. But also Dean's available to help with videos like this. So do get in touch with him and reach out for some advice if you'd like to do that. Moving on now to how your website looks on different devices like mobiles and tablets. Obviously, people are going to be accessing your content using a variety of different devices. So a responsive design is really important. And that means your content scales to fit on any screen size automatically. Check that your content doesn't become too squished or too small or too big even to read. And make sure that people can pinch and zoom and control the size of the content if they need to. Another thing to consider for mobiles is your tap targets. Those are the bits that you click on with your fingers. It's considered that 44 pixels wide is a good size that's big enough for fingers to tap on buttons. And think about how your menu works on smaller devices and mobiles too. Some navigation menus can be quite big and complicated. So how are you presenting that so people can get to the content they need to? On the Digital Culture Network site, we've created a different menu for mobiles, so it simplifies the site a little bit because there's quite a lot of links in our main navigation on a computer. Moving on to video accessibility tips. If you use videos, it's really good practice to provide captions so that people with impaired hearing can read along with any spoken elements of the film. Captions are added to videos using something called an SRT file. And these are small files or text files with a time code paired to sections of the text that relate to the video content. And this means that the captions will show up at the right time when you're playing the video. For pre-recorded videos, there are closed captions and open captions. Closed captions can be turned on and off, and they're the ones that use an SRT file, whereas open captions tend to be burned into the screen at all times and always visible. You can't close them or control them. For live events and webinars, there are two types of captioning to consider. There's auto captioning and live captioning. YouTube, Teams, Zoom, and Google Meet all have captioning features, auto captioning features. Basically, it listens to what you're saying and adds captions on the fly. It's not always great for accuracy, but it can be a really cost-effective way of adding captions to live events. Live captioning, on the other hand, is a lot more accurate. We've got the talented Joanne working with us today from Stage Text, doing a great job. And live captioning is perfect for webinars and live streaming. The live captioner joins your webinar and types out what you're saying as you're saying it. And the platforms I know of that support live captioning are YouTube and Zoom. But if you're doing pre-recorded videos and you're trying to just transcribe them, a little tip here is to take the strain out, is to upload them to YouTube, allow some time for the system to generate the captions, and then the YouTube Studio has got a video caption editor, so you can go in, make them better, fix those typos, correct that grammar and all that kind of thing. And there's also another piece of software that Dean's been recommending lately, which is called CapCut, which is an online video platform. You don't even need to download it, and it's free. So I'll make sure Dean shares some links for that as well. You can also consider adding an audio description track for those viewers with impaired vision. Audio descriptive tracks describe what's going on in a video as it's happening. But it's worth noting that if you're careful to script your videos well, it reduces the need to do both, because captions and the video audio itself should cover most of what you need. I'm going to briefly discuss newsletter accessibility because when it comes to newsletters, Jacqueline, our tech champion for email, is your girl. She's actually done a great webinar on emails and accessibility that I'll share with you. So I'll just quickly run through a few pointers. Everything that I've talked about already before for website applies also to newsletters, so pay attention to that link text and the buttons that you might use, so using words that let people know where that link takes them. Don't rely on images alone to convey information, and avoid using text on top of images. Pay attention to color contrast, and also when you're sending out your newsletters, make sure you offer a plain text version. If you're only sending in HTML, some people don't have the capabilities on their email platforms to read HTML newsletters very well. And the last point about newsletters is to make sure you test them on a lot of different devices and platforms and mobiles and things like that, because it can be displayed wildly differently on different devices. Just making sure that it isn't difficult to read, or the text isn't too small and that type of thing. And I'm going to briefly chat about some social media accessibility tips as well. Again, the same rules that I've discussed previously apply. It's a really good idea to use simple language, caption your videos, and make sure there's a good color contrast between text and backgrounds if you're adding text over images. And on most social media platforms, you can also add alt text to images by choosing the edit features. So it's always worth adding them if you can. And if you're using hashtags, it's a really good idea to title case them. Title casings when you add a capital letter to each of the words in the hashtag, because it makes it easier for screen readers to understand and read them out. It also just makes them visually simpler to read. And if you're using them within a sentence of your post, it's probably better just to have one or two so as not to complicate the sentence as it's read out. So for example, come along to our hashtag festival would sound okay, as the word relates to that sentence well. If there are a couple of others you'd like to add, I'd suggest putting them at the end of the post so that screen readers can skip past them if they want to. If you're using emojis, try not to use more than a couple of emojis to keep your social media posts simple. It can sound quite weird if they're read out all in a line together from screen readers. And it's a really good idea to describe what that emoji signifies in the post. So in the example I have on the screen now, I've put look at the image below along with the finger down emoji. So the text tells you what the emoji is signifying. And moving on to PDF resources and any digital downloads you might have. Again, all the things we've discussed about contrast, simple language, meaningful links, alt tags, simple fonts, they all apply to your PDF downloads and resources as well. To make sure they're accessible, it's a really great idea to do all of those things. And if you're using Acrobat Professional, there's an automated accessibility checker you can use with the tool. Alternatively, you can use something like PowerPoint or Google Slides to create your PDFs. Both of these tools have got accessibility checkers that you can use to create accessible PDFs and make sure that there's no errors in them. Lastly, I just want to talk about user feedback, because overall, one of the simplest and most effective ways you can get accessibility and usability improvement ideas is to ask your audience. Gaining insights from your site visitors or your digital content users can highlight the things that can really improve the usability and effectiveness of your content. And a good technique is to ask people to perform a specific task, such as booking a ticket or finding out how to get to your venue, or anything that you've created that content for, any of the goals and objectives you've got for it. Think about those and then give people instructions to go and do those things. And then the feedback that they give you is really insightful, because you can use that to help you make the improvements and adjustments that you need to make your content more effective and accessible. Lastly, I just want to show you what it's like to use a screen reader, because I'm guessing a lot of you probably don't know what it's like to use one. So I'm going to play you a short video.
Using a screen reader. Hadi's an accessibility expert, and he's also a user of accessible technology. He uses a refreshable braille display and screen reading software that reads everything on the screen.
I am blind, and I use a screen reader program at home and here, on everywhere. Screen reader program is a software that communicates with the operating system and conveys the information to me.
Welcome. Blank. Accessible pages. Design features of this design of this.
You know, even you are reading as a sighted person, you do not read every content at the same speed, right? Sometimes you have to make a pause and then review what you have read and then digest the information. For us, it's the same thing. When we are reading, for example, a normal conversation, we can read it very fast. And then, but when we are reading technical content, then we go a little slower, we make more pauses.
Accessible University 1.
I have slowed down my screen reader program.
Banner. Heading level 1 graphic accessible university. Banner end.
But if it is, for example, about email, I can go
faster, 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 faster. Main menu navigation region. Show menu keyboard shortcuts button. Blank. Above menu submenu collapsed.
I can go that fast.
Link collapsed academics.
If you've got no lived experience of facing accessibility barriers, it can be really difficult to know how to create accessible content or why you're doing it. And I think that video highlighted that using simple language and well-ordered descriptive links can be incredibly useful tactics for creating accessible content. And it shows why applying the simple fundamentals of all the things that we've discussed today is really important for your accessible, for making your content accessible to audiences. So we just covered a lot of useful and simple steps that you can take to make your content accessible. Next, I'm going to show you some handy tools and resources. The W3C I've put together a fabulous free course on accessibility that covers the basics of what you need to know. So it's well worth taking it if you want to delve a bit deeper into this subject. Or perhaps if you're getting your website redesigned, you can tell your web developer to take it so that they fully understand what accessibility is and what you need to do. And I wanted to highlight these two tools that I use. They're both tools that I use to audit websites for accessibility. There's Google Lighthouse, and it's a great little tool by Google that checks your site and gives you a list of things that you might want to look at, how to fix them, and that type of thing. And there's a Chrome extension that's free, and I'll send out a link for this too. But Google Lighthouse will do a quick automated check of the page, generate a report, and it'll detail everything about what's gone wrong and how you can fix it, or any mistakes it might have spotted. And you can send that report to your web developer, or even try and tackle some of those simpler fixes yourself. And I use the Lighthouse tool as well as the WebAIM tool, which does a pretty similar job, except it's much more visual and interactive, and you can click about on the page. It shows your web page and highlights areas that you can click on for more information around the code, and it gives you accessibility fix instructions or suggestions as well. And WebAIM is also a really great tool for checking the color contrast ratio between foreground and background colors on your site. I mean, all of the digital content, any content you create really should be checked for errors and typos and broken links. And the accessibility check should simply become part of that process to improve your user experience for everyone. If you need to do an accessibility audit on your website, the gov.uk website has got an easy to follow guide on how to self-assess. It's really easy to follow, and it steps you through all the basics and tells you the types of things you need to check for and how many pages on your site you need to check and that type of thing. And I'd say, if you're going to ask me how many pages on a site do you need to check or assess or audit, I would think about all those really important mission critical things that you need to do on your website and check those pages, make those a priority. You don't need to check every single page on your website, just the really important ones. And it's a really good idea to create an accessibility statement if you've got a website as well. And if you don't have the help of an expert, the W3C have created this really handy accessibility statement generator tool that steps you through creating your own accessibility statement. If you do the simple audit on the slide before, you'll have all the information you need to fill this generator out. And I'll be sure to share a link to this resource as well. And also, don't forget, you've got me to refer to for one-to-one free support and advice on these things as well. So feel free to book yourself a session with me on the Digital Culture Network website. And you were wondering where to find live captioning services. There's an IPSO called Stage Text that can provide live captioning services, and they'll also provide you with an SRT file to add to any recordings of your videos that you want to upload to YouTube or preserve online after the event. And there's another sector support or IPSO called Vocalize, and they can provide live audio description services again, and also they'll provide you the audio descriptive tracks for you to include in your recordings of sessions. And there's a fantastic website called AbilityNet, and it's a great site packed full of accessibility advice and resources, so well worth checking out for further research and inspiration. We've covered a lot here today. We started with what digital accessibility is. We discussed the principles of digital accessibility, and then we went through some simple tips that can get you started on making your content more accessible right away. We then covered some tools and resources. We will be sending this presentation out with further information afterwards. And I just wanted to say that accessibility might seem a little daunting, but the more you experiment, the more conversations you have, the more you talk to people, the more things you try out, the easier it gets, and you develop your strategy over time and improve your content experience. Your audience will connect with you and see that you're really trying for them as well. So it's really, really worthwhile, and you'll end up with much more effective content. Before we move on to questions, I just want to do a quick plug for our resources. So we've got a fabulous YouTube channel, and it's full of all the past webinar recordings and other videos that we might have. And we've also got the Digital Culture Network website, and it's full of resources, past recordings, webinars, and you can also use it to get in touch with a tech champion and ask for one-to-one support from us. It's also got our future events on it. So be sure to check it out. And it's time for questions, Dean.
Hello. I'm
Hello.
frantically typing. I'm not typing as fast as Joanne, but I've been frantically typing. We've had some fantastic questions. Some are in the chat, some are in the questions. So I think you've covered a couple of them where we're going to be sending out the slides to the presentation afterwards with all the links. So that's really good. So that was Lydia's question. Rebecca asked, how do you leave a blank alt text tag instead of a file name? And can you share a resource for writing good alt text for images?
I will dig out a really good resource. There are a couple out there, and I'll probably actually create one for the resources section on the website as well. Essentially, when I'm thinking about writing good alt text, though, I try and imagine describing that image to someone who can't see. And also you will have used that image to import some kind of emotion or add some value to the content. To try and incorporate that kind of side of it as well is a really good idea. And to add a blank alt tag, you can basically bring up your alt, if you're using a content management system. You can, when you're adding your images, there's often a place to put an alt text in there, and literally my hack around this is to open that text box and put a space in, just like a normal space on your space key, and that will force it to generate an alt tag for that image.
Yeah, see? Yes. Right, I'm going to show my ignorance here. Ian's asked, is it okay to use accordions on web pages?
I think as long as there's something called ARIA, and as long as you've it's a way of telling a screen reader what that content does and what its purpose is. And I think if you're using accordions with ARIA, it should be okay. But again, when you're checking your website with a keyboard, you can test and see if you can access that information easily.
Okay, so will you include that resource in the follow-up that you spoke about there?
Yes. Yeah.
Cool. What is the best practice for on-screen text used to reinforce messages that are separate from captions, especially open captions? Is text helpful to reinforce main points or confusing for people also seeing captions? And should on-screen text be simplified and summarized, or should it match captions verbatim? That was Caroline.
I think the more you can match it up, the better, because visually, you don't want to be duplicating things, really, do you? Yeah, I think it can be quite confusing to have things doubled up. I think with that kind of thing, I think you experiment with it, and I would probably go with simpler, concise, that type of thing. Or if you want to drive home a point, maybe that would be used to emphasize that point or important information. But the simpler, the better. Yeah,
I was just thinking of like something on YouTube, on Twitter, you'd keep it quite simple and summarized, wouldn't you? So that's cool. That's cool. Right, Emma has asked, would you recommend using closed or open captions when creating video content? That's kind of where does it end up, doesn't it? So what would you suggest? closed or open?
I prefer the I don't know the ultimate answer. I think you can go with either. Visually, I think it's really accessible to create closed captions because you give people the option whether to turn them on or off again. If you're going to use open captions, just make sure that the action or any other information that you're trying to get across isn't blocked out by those captions. Quite a lot of time I'll see that people have enabled closed captions and they've also got open captions, so you end up with double captioning, which isn't a great look either. So yeah, just I think if you're going to use open captions, then turn off the closed captions option.
Yeah, I mean, like Twitter and things that are probably viewed maybe with the sound off sometimes would be
Yeah,
great to have the captions burnt on there. And then something like a YouTube, you've got the option to have the captions on or off. Typically people watch YouTube videos for longer duration. So yeah, so it ultimately depends on where it's going. But I spoke to somebody today about captions on YouTube, Twitter, sorry, and she said that she doesn't watch them if there's no captions on there because she has the sound down, and that kind of like sort of informed me just on sort of how she sort of watched video content on Twitter. So
yeah, I'm finding a lot of younger people watch with captions on as well. All my children do, and they don't have any hearing impairment, so it's a lot of people choose to watch videos without sound, so it's always a good idea to include them.
Right, now we've now got the problem where it's in the chat. So some of the questions are in the chat.
Okay.
So yes, we are going to be having the recording on our YouTube channel at the end, so that's good. Somebody, Rachel Fitzpatrick, shared a really excellent access guide on Accessible. So
Fantastic.
there's a link in there. That's good. How can we? This is from Verity. How can we fix some of the things if there are issues, e.g., if keyboard navigation can be improved, or if there are problems with how a website is displayed across different devices, i.e., on a common host like WordPress? So,
I was going to say that sometimes you might have to refer to the person that built the site and get help from them just to make it accessible. If you've got restraints like financial restraints and things like that, you might want to consider providing a text-only version of that content or an alternate way of accessing it. So just by creating maybe an accessible PDF download or something along those lines. It's just about giving people options. And then also in your accessibility statement, if there's an issue with the content and you know it's a known issue, but you can't do anything about it, it's best to sort of state it in there saying you're aware of it. And this is, here's an alternative way of accessing that content.
which might be that PDF
Yeah.
download. Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Isabel's asked, can you explain the alt tags more, as I haven't come across them before? So I suppose if nobody's ever seen the way that those readers read alt tags, that's quite a new thing for everyone, isn't it?
Yeah. So what as a screen reader goes across an image on a page, there's a piece of code behind it called an alt tag. And what you're really doing here is describing the purpose or the meaning of that image to the user. And when you're uploading that image, that's your opportunity to create that alt tag and create that sentence or that bit of text that relates to that image. And you can use it for social media, newsletters, PDFs. Anywhere you've got images in content, you should be able to add alt text, really.
Brilliant.
And I'll actually send out a guide on how to write effective alt tags as well.
Lovely. Right. Does WebAIM work with other languages apart from English?
Oh, I have no idea.
You know what? I was like so left field. I was like,
Yeah.
she could do. I don't know.
But essentially, it won't. If you're you're only using WebAIM to assess the accessibility. So in terms of like reading text, it won't read text entirely. It'll just say something along the lines of, like, if you're using links like read more or click here, it'll say suspicious web link text, so check it out. So it'll highlight potential issues. I would imagine it would do it for multiple languages. I couldn't see why not. But I will check that out because I've never been asked that before.
No, never, no. I've got two questions. So is the best way to format text is white text on dark blue background? Is there a good guide on how to structure text? Is the best way to format text is white text on a dark blue background? I suppose.
Is this for captioning or for?
I don't know. Because I assume that with captions, it's generally black background, isn't it? It's a dark.
Yeah, with dark on white, or if you have like a background behind it, it's either going to be white on the white background, black text, or the other way around, black background, white text. I would say for content in general, as long as it's high contrast, as long as there's a visual difference, and you can use the WebAIM tool or color contrast analyzer is another tool that you can use to check for those contrast accessibility things. Yeah, it's as long as you're using a background that's clearly defined from the foreground text and high contrast.
Brilliant. I imagine that's probably where it was to do with what I suppose all content, because maybe the dark blue is referring to our slides and the white background. Okay.
I just chose that because it's easier on the eye, I guess, because sometimes you can get a bit of screen glare from white, so sometimes it can be easier on the eye.
Okay. Would it be okay to get a link for how to write accessible emails that Roberta mentioned? So that's obviously
that's Jacqueline's webinar that she did with Accessible by Design Caspian Turner, and I will make sure that we can send that out afterwards. It's on the website as well.
Brilliant. And I think this might be the last question. I'm sorry, I'm firing at you with them. Just to clarify, on-screen text and open captions, if you're highlighting an important point, should you repeat part of the caption verbatim or summarize in different words from the captions?
I would say if you're going to do that, if you want to emphasize something important, I would mimic what the captions are saying, because it's doubling up and it's easier to process that information.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're right there. I think it does obviously depend on where the content eventually goes, but I suppose that's the best way of sort of making sure that it's not missed.
It's always one of those things. I've tried to really avoid using a lot of text on my slides because I've been speaking a lot of words, and reading along while someone's speaking out can often distract you from what they're saying. So it's a fine line, and I think if you're in doubt about it, just to create 2 experiments and see which people respond the better to.
Brilliant. I missed somebody put lovely comments, by the way, thank you very much. I might have missed this, but is a preferred options for wording to avoid using click here? Oh right, so an alternative to click here.
Yeah, so if you were selling tickets, for example, you wouldn't say book now, you would say book tickets for X show. Oh, Cinderella. Book Cinderella tickets, for example. Or if it was sign up, you wouldn't just say sign up, you would say sign up to our newsletter, or that kind of thing. So it describes the action that someone's going to take and where it will take them.
Brilliant. Jacqueline's here. She's already left a link to her email marketing
brilliant
webinar. So how's good of her?
Thank you,
Thank you very
Jacqueline.
much, Jacqueline. Yeah, cheers. That is it. I believe that is all the questions.
Fantastic.
They're in brilliant. There's so many wonderful comments. Hold on. Thank you so much for excellent presentation. Packed with super useful info here.
Brilliant.
So loads of people saying that. So well done, Roberta. I'll hand it back to you to finish off.
Fantastic. I'm just leaving this on the screen here for you to, for the various ways you can follow us or get in touch. And I also want to do a little plug here, because I'd like, you'll be receiving a feedback survey after the event, and I'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to fill it in. This helps us improve the sessions we run for you, so it'd be really super useful. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming along today. It's been really lovely to be here, and get in touch if you want any help from me. I'll see you again soon.